everyone, and welcome to video 2 in chapter 2.1. So in the first video we did all of those 4 learning objectives. We did the demand curve, we looked at the relationship between price and quantity demanded. In this video we're going to look at why the demand curve might shift, and I think this is a lot more interesting. So let's move on. So in the first video, just to quickly refresh, we had a downward sloping demand curve. And that was because we had an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. And what that meant is as the price goes up, consumers are less willing to buy it. And so therefore the quantity demanded will go down. And so that then told us why consumers buy more or less because of a change in price. So in that situation, when the price increases or decreases, we just simply move along this demand curve. There's no change in the curve because price is on the y-axis. We're just moving up and down the curve. So there we go, price is on the y-axis. So this is shown as a movement along the curve. So what this video is about is how do we shift the whole curve? What are the factors that's going to cause the whole curve to shift? And I'll give you a clue. One of them is not price, okay? This is really, really important because if the price changes, like I just said, we're going to move up and down that curve because price is on the y-axis. So what does that look like if we were to graph this and put this in a table? So on the left-hand side, you can see at a price of 50, currently, the quantity demanded is 20 million. And you can see that on the blue demand curve. At a price of $50, then the quantity demanded is we go across until we intersect with the first demand curve. And then we go down to get a quantity demanded of 20 million. So yeah, previously quantity demanded was 20 million. But now what's happened? Something has changed in the market. So now suddenly at the same price of 50, consumers are willing to buy 30 million. And what we can do is we can draw this new demand curve over here, and we're going to get the black line. So you can see that every single price, at a price of 10, it's gone from 40 to 50. At a price of 20, it's gone from 35 to 45, etc., etc. So the whole curve has shifted outwards, and at every single price, the quantity demanded has increased. So, for example, at a price of 50, quantity demanded was 20 million. Now it's 30 million. And so if we go across from 50, we can go across to the black curve, and therefore we get a quantity demanded of 30 million. And what's important here, this is not caused by a change in price, because you could see at the same price of 50, people are more willing to buy it. So there's nothing to do with price here. Price has not changed, though it might change in the future, as we'll see later. But people are more willing to buy the product because of something else. It's not price related. And that's what's going to cause a shift in the demand curve. And yeah, quantity demanded has increased at all prices. And that's actually our definition of an increase in demand, is when the demand curve is going to shift outwards and quantity demanded increases at all price. And I will do another video on that as well. So yeah, an increase in demand, and therefore we're going to shift outwards in the demand. Demand curve curves, that might be a typo. That is a typo there. So it just should be demand curves. So what can cause this? So what we're going to see, we're going to go through 6 factors. So these are going to be called, confusingly, the non-price determinants of demand. And all this is saying is these are things that can shift the demand curve that are not price related. And as we saw on the last slide, if we do get that change in price, we're just going to move up and down the demand curve. So these are all reasons that the demand curve will shift. People want to buy more or less of something, not because of price. And that's what non-price determinants of demand. And we're going to go through 6: income, tastes and preferences, future price expectations, price of substitutes, price of complements, which are called related goods. Related goods means they have some sort of relationship to the original good, and the number of consumers. And I'm going to call these the Pepsi-C factors or the PepSiC factors, and I'll explain that later. It's just an acronym we can use. So the first one is going to be income, which I think is probably the easiest to understand. So usually as income increases, demand will increase. Okay, and the reason for that, for example, the demand for shoes will increase as consumers have more disposable income. So let's say that the economy becomes richer, consumers are going to have more money, or we can call it more disposable income, which is the money that they can spend on goods and services. And so if people have more money, they're going to buy more of most goods and services. So I think this is quite intuitive. As income goes up, the demand will go up and we'll get a shift outwards in the demand curve. However, we now need to distinguish between normal goods and inferior goods. So normal goods is when income goes up, demand goes up. But there are some goods where as income increases, demand for these goods will actually go down. This doesn't make much sense, does it? But if I give you some examples, hopefully it will. So two examples are bus travel and supermarket-owned brands. Now the theory is let's say we have consumers who travel on buses. If they have more money, at some point as they get more money, they might decide, I'm not going to take the bus anymore. Maybe I'll take a taxi or maybe I'll buy my own car. Similarly with supermarket-owned brands, this is generally like a cheaper alternative. And so as people have more money, maybe they'll decide, okay, I'm not going to buy the supermarket-owned brand. I'm going to buy the famous brand. And therefore, with these types of goods, as income goes up, consumers switch to more expensive alternatives. So therefore, we call these inferior goods. Later on, when we do elasticities, we'll talk about these in a bit more detail. Okay, tastes and preferences, again, I think is quite intuitive. So tastes and preferences is all about consumer choices about what they like to buy. So these are things that influence us about why we like to buy things. And this can be influenced by so many different things. Things like advertisements, fashion, peer pressure, habits, culture, medical research, and things like TikTok. So an example I like to use is these Stanley tumblers. And basically, as a good or service becomes more popular, then demand will increase. I think that's quite intuitive. So, for example, these Stanley tumblers, I hate these things. I'm not a big fan of these things. But there was a TikTok craze, and then suddenly everyone wanted to buy it. And again, people wanted to buy more of it, not because of price, not because of income. It was just because of tastes and preferences within the market had changed. So suddenly there was an increase in demand at the same price, people wanted to buy more. Similarly with fashion, with advertisements, companies are trying to get us to buy more of it. Medical research, maybe some sort of medical research is published saying some sort of food is really good for you. Recent example was kale, this green vegetable, and then suddenly everyone wants to go and buy it, and we get an increase in demand. Okay, let's move on to substitutes and complements. So these are price of related goods. So the first one is substitute goods. These are when two goods or services can easily be replaced or changed for each other. So for example, we might have the same good, which is sports shoes, and we might have different brands. So Nike and Adidas shoes are substitutes because consumers can easily replace one for the other. Although maybe some consumers really like Nike, so they're not willing to change it. But tea and coffee is another example. So over here we've got tea and coffee. So for some people, people might see tea and coffee as substitute goods. And so the relationship here is, if say the price of coffee were to increase, then we would see an increase in the demand for tea. Because what would happen is, if you see coffee and tea as substitutes, if the price of the coffee goes up, maybe you're thinking, well, okay, that's now more expensive, so I'm going to go and buy the other good. If the price of Nike shoes goes up, some consumers will go, okay, they're too expensive for me now, so I'm going to go and buy the Adidas shoes because they're slightly cheaper in relationship to the Nike. So in general, with the price of a good increases, the demand for the other good, the substitute good, will increase. The other type of related goods are complementary goods, and this is when two goods or services can be consumed together. So, for example, coffee and milk. Now, not for everyone. Some people don't put milk in their coffee, but a lot of people will put milk in their coffee. So these are complementary goods. When we drink coffee, it's likely we drink milk. Another example is sushi and soy sauce. So a lot of people who eat sushi will then have soy sauce alongside of it, so we'll tend to buy those together. If we go to the supermarket and buy sushi, it's likely we're going to buy soy sauce unless we've got some at home, obviously. Another one might be mobile phones and mobile phone cases. I think most people put their phones into a case. So the relationship here is the opposite to substitute goods. So if the price of coffee increases, then the demand for milk will decrease. And the reason for that is, if the price of coffee increases, then people are less likely to buy coffee. And therefore, if they use less coffee, they're going to use less of milk because it's a complementary good. And then that gives us our relationship here. If the price of a good increases, the demand for the complementary good will decrease. So example, the sushi. The sushi prices go up, people will buy less sushi, and therefore the demand for soy sauce will go down. Okay, on to the last two non-price determinants of demand. The next one is future price expectations, which I think is probably the most difficult to understand, but it's not too bad. This is opinions about what will likely happen to the price in the future. So, for example, let's say consumers expect that the price of a brand of mobile phones will increase in the future. They might choose to buy it now rather than wait. So again, if you're going to buy something and then you hear in the newspaper or you read in the newspaper or you hear on somewhere they're going to increase the prices in the future, it's likely some people will go, okay, I'm going to buy it now because then I can get the cheaper price rather than wait. So therefore, if consumers expect prices to rise in the future, the demand for the good or service will increase now because people will try and buy it before the price goes up. Similarly with sales, we've got the Black Friday sale over here. If you know that there's going to be a sale in 2 months, it's likely some consumers might wait. Okay, I'm not going to buy the phone now. I'm going to wait for 2 months when it's likely to go on sale. And therefore, if you think the price will go down in the future, it's likely you're going to reduce your demand now and wait until later on. The last one is the number of consumers. So this is the population of potential buyers of the good or service. So for example, if we have a population which is aging, so that means we have more old people. So the population of old people goes up, then there's going to be increase in the demand for products designed for old people. So things like walking sticks, healthcare, etc., etc. Similarly, if we have immigration into the country, so if more people move into the country, this will increase the population of the country and increase the demand. So that brings us on to the relationship, which is that the number of consumers increases, the demand for the good or service will also increase. I think that one's quite intuitive. So let's move on. So we can then summarize these into I call them the Pepsi-C factors or the PEPSIC factors. So we got preferences, which we called tastes and preferences, expectations, future expectations of price, population of buyers and sellers, price of substitutes, income, and price of complements. So I kind of use this as a way of remembering the 6 factors. So these are the 6 factors in the syllabus. However, there are other non-price determinants, and I'm just going to summarize those very, very quickly. We get seasonal changes. So, for example, the demand for skis increases in winter, but then decreases in summer. We can also think about things like suntan cream will increase in summer, decrease in winter. Consumer confidence. So if consumers are not confident in the economy, they might be worried about their jobs in the future, so they might cut back on spending and reduce demand. Technological improvements. So for example, app food delivery might increase the demand for restaurant food because people can more easily get takeaway. So restaurants might sell more food. And then we also have something called network effects, which we'll do later as well. As more people use a social media platform, more people want to use it. And the idea is that people, if we know that our friends are using some sort of social media platform, the more friends that use it, the more likely we are. So we have this kind of what's called a network effect. Right, last thing, this video is a bit long. So diagram showing movement along the demand curve and shifts of the demand curve. So on the left, we have the movement. On the right, we have the shifts. I'm just going to summarize this. So a movement along the demand curve is when we move from one point on the demand curve to another point on the demand curve. And this is caused by a change in price. The whole of the first video was all about this. And this leads to a new quantity demand curve. For example, the price increases from 20 to 30. Quantity demanded will decrease from 35 million to 30 million. I've gone over that 3-4 times, so hopefully that's making some sense by now. Shift of demand curve is what we've been talking about during this video. This is when the whole demand curve shifts inwards or outwards. So here it's shifting outwards. And this is caused by one of the changes in one of the non-price determinants. So this is the substitute complements, income, etc., etc. I will do another video where I just go through this as well. All right, if you're SL, you're now done with this chapter. The next video will cover these 3. I'll see you next time.